folks. I'm Bill Tucker with Zach McIntosh from Concordia, and this is our Isolation Bible Study. And on the Mondays during these summer months, as we move through the book of Numbers, we're taking the opportunity to go back to the lesson from this past weekend. So this weekend it would be Numbers chapter 11. So you can find that in your Bibles and get ready. And then we take extra points. So in addition to a very quick review of the message from the previous weekend, then we also add some points because there's always way more in the text than we can possibly cover in the message in 30 minutes, or even in the adult Bible class when you have a whole hour luxuriously. So that's kind of where we want to go today. Talk about Numbers chapter 11, and if you remember, yesterday we had 2 points around the big theme that God provides. And Zach, why don't you kind of set the stage for what was happening and then remind us of those 2 points from yesterday?
Yeah, so this is a story in Numbers 11 of when God not only provides manna for the Israelites, but when he provides quail, because the Israelites are basically grumbling and complaining. They're not happy with a carb-only diet. They want a little bit of protein. And so God sends them not only meat, he sends them more meat than they could possibly eat. And so we talked about a couple of different things. First thing is that God can provide to teach us. And really what God is trying to teach the Israelites here is there can be such a thing as too much of a good thing. Sometimes the greatest things that God provides, as we talked yesterday, come not so much in what God gives, but in with what God withholds from us. Because if God gives us everything our heart desires, sometimes that can actually do damage to our heart. In fact, I was thinking about this with regard to a story that Jesus tells in Luke 12 about a rich man who has an abundant harvest, and he builds these huge barns so he can store all of his harvest. And God comes to him and he says, "Hey, you're a fool." And that's not an insult. That's just an accurate analysis of who this guy truly is. Because this night, God says to him, your life is going to be required of you, and you don't have this set up to pass along to be a blessing to anybody else. This guy had more than he could possibly ever eat or use in his lifetime. And it actually turned out to do damage to his heart. And so that's one of the things that God is trying to teach the Israelites, that there can be such a thing as too much of a good thing.
You know, it reminds me, Zach, as I think about it, just the whole idea, the concept in Scripture of a hardened heart. And the reality of a hardened heart is that ultimately God just gives you over to who you are and to your disposition to be far away from God. And so it kind of goes along with the same theme. Sometimes God's judgment or God's wrath is poured out on us by giving us exactly what we want, and it produces a discontent or a suffering or exactly the opposite of what we had hoped for.
Yeah. Now, the other big point was that God provides to us because he loves us. And this really is kind of the heart and soul of the gospel, right? God so loved the world that he gave. Love is what drives God's giving. And really, love is why God is giving to the Israelites at this moment, even as he's trying to teach them by giving them too much quail, more quail than they can ever eat. He's still trying to love them because he could just destroy them because of their grumbling. In fact, we talked yesterday, if I was God, there wouldn't be any way that I would want to help out Moses with some helpers, because one of the things that happens in Numbers 11 is that Moses whines and complains to God, and he says to God, "Hey, God, this isn't my fault. This is your fault. You're the one who made these people, and you're the one who gave me these people. And I told you this wasn't going to work. I told you that I was not the right leader for them." And so Moses is griping. The rest of the Israelites are griping. Moses doesn't want to lead. The Israelites want more to eat. And if I were in charge, I'd say, you know what? Moving on. Let's go somewhere else. But God doesn't do that. He wants to teach them, even if it's a hard teaching, because he loves them. And that's the way that Jesus operates too. God could have just wiped us out in our sin, but instead God provides for us Jesus, who becomes kind of in a lot of ways the new manna that's bread from heaven. Well, Jesus says, I'm the bread that came down from heaven. And so even when we grumble and gripe and complain, that doesn't stop God's provision.
So Zach, I know we've got a couple of additional points to add, but I wonder if we could start out with a couple of things, because at the heart of this, the Israelites ultimately say, we don't want manna anymore. We're sick and tired of this ridiculous, disgusting manna. And what's really cool, and we didn't get to cover this in Numbers, is that when it talks about manna and what it tasted like, they would take it, they would gather it, they would grind it up into a flour, and then they would make it into something that the text says tasted like pastries made with olive oil. So it's not like these folks are suffering. They've got some terrible thing. I mean, pastry sounds pretty good right about now, right? It's about the fact that they had something really good that they just got really tired of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a guy who may have a bit of a sweet tooth, and so if somebody offers me a pastry, I am prone to say yes. And that's the idea. The other thing I think we need to remember is that yes, they are eating manna in the wilderness, but originally this was meant to be a very temporary dietary stop. A lot of scholars have done research on this. The actual length of time it takes you to get from Egypt to Canaan to the promised land is really just a couple of weeks. And so although you may get a little tired of eating pastries after a couple of weeks, that ain't bad. And so the reason that the wilderness wandering happens, we'll talk about this as we go through the book of Numbers, has very little to do with God and him wanting them to somehow wander around in the wilderness for 40 years, and everything to do with the Israelites and their rebellion. And so God is saying, for 2 weeks, I want you to eat sweets. Can you handle that? And then maybe we'll make a change after that. And the Israelites, they're just never satisfied, which actually it tells us something very deep about satisfaction. Satisfaction really is not about how much or how little you have, it's about the state of your heart.
The other thing I think is really interesting that we didn't talk much about yesterday is the fact that this all begins outside the people of Israel. That it's the rabble, it's the folks who were not Israelites who were also traveling with the Israelites. And so who knows what that number is, but it's probably a big group of people. They began to have these greedy thoughts, these lusty thoughts. They wanted something else. And that literally became contagious and infected the Israelites, so that every family, it says, Moses heard every family crying out in despair that they had to eat this terrible manna.
So there's an old saying, right? Be careful the company that you keep. And this is one of these things I think we need to ask, even when it comes to our own faith. Am I around people who engage me, who build me up, or who tear me down? And here's kind of the way I would encourage folks to think about it. Everybody should have, by God's grace, a couple of different types of relationships. Okay, there are relationships where people pour into you. There are also relationships where you pour into people. And then there's kind of a third category of relationships, which are probably kind of the closest category of relationships. The old saying for this is they're mutually edifying relationships, right? Where you pour into them and where they pour into you. Now, the kind of relationships where people pour into you, these are kind of like mentor relationships, and everybody needs a mentor because otherwise you're never going to be able to grow. You need someone several steps ahead of you to learn from. And if you don't have that person, you need to get that person. Then there are the relationships where you pour into other people. And these are sometimes kind of witnessing relationships where you're giving your faith away, or maybe someone's going through a real hard time and they need a little bit of your wisdom. And then there are those relationships, like hopefully our marriages or parts of those relationships that are mutually edifying, where you shoulder up against someone, you put your back up against someone, and you walk through life together. And so if you lose one of those relationships, honestly, you're going to be out of balance relationally. You're not going to be giving away what you've learned to the next generation or to people who need it. Okay, so the rabble isn't necessarily bad if you have the other two relationships. It's when you don't have those other types of relationships and all you do is surround yourself by people who need stuff from you that you become exhausted. Or if you only take stuff from a mentor and never pass it on, well, then you're just greedy. Or if you never have those close, intimate, personal relationships where you're mutually edified by someone, then you become lonely.
Well, and I think that's all really good perspective. when I was reading this and thinking about this, I guess I was thinking even a bit more simply about it. That there are always the voices around us, not even necessarily those relationships of substance, but they're always the voices around us that have an influence on us. And especially, think about social media. So there are folks who are posting prayer requests, and there are folks who are telling great stories, and folks who are posting wonderful music or videos, or even just stuff that's fun. I don't know, have you seen the video of the dad who's the special effects director, and he creates a special effects video of his son during the isolate? It's awesome because this kid is on a pirate ship and he's being chased by sharks. There's lots of cool stuff out there, but there's also in social media a, a voice of negativity that I think can begin to affect us, because that's really what I'm thinking happens uh, as the people of Israel are out there, and they're eating this manna and things are going along, and people begin to complain outside the camp of the Israelites, and it begins to infect the mentality of the Israelites, so much so that they actually reach the point, and this is the real offense to God, that they say, you know what? We'd rather be back in Israel enslaved than out here with God.
Yeah, the very thing that God had tried to free them from, they want to go back to. Now, that sounds dumb, but we do the same thing too. This is Paul's call, right? Where Paul says it's for freedom that Christ has set you free. Stand firm then, and do not be bound again to a yoke of slavery. Now, why would Paul have to say that? Because who really wants to be bound to a yoke of slavery? Well, we do, if we're honest with ourselves. This is why, for example, AA, like Alcoholics Anonymous, will talk about how old addictions die hard and they never really die, which is why you always need to be on the lookout, because the temptation is when things get rough or when things get tough, you go back to what you know, even if what you know is bad, because the past always has a nostalgia to it that the future never does. And so we tend to sugarcoat things in the past, or we tend to glance over things in the past. And that's really all the rabble are tempting the Israelites to do. They're saying, you know what? The menu in Egypt was better. Sure, there were beatings, and sure, there were murders, and sure, you had to make bricks in very difficult ways. You couldn't even use straw to like keep them together. Sure, there was a wicked Pharaoh. Sure, everything was going wrong and you were miserable there. But remember the menu. And all of a sudden, the menu of Egypt eclipses everything else. All of a sudden, the fun of that one drink eclipses all the pain that it caused you, or whatever it is for you. And so we need people around us who can give us perspective on our old slavery. Otherwise, all of us will be tempted to go back to it.
Well, and that's why we talk about all the time the need for accountability partners. And again, whether you call it that or not, we all need those relationships, not out of the categories that you were talking about before, the mentors or the mutually beneficial relationships, but people that we trust to speak into our lives, so that when they're affirming us and affirming what we're doing, we feel great about that. We feel encouraged by that. But when they say, well, wait a minute, that's not making sense, or that doesn't sound quite right, or will you explain that to me again? It causes us to perk up our ears and listen carefully, because these people are investing themselves in us. We know that they love us enough to tell us the truth.
And so, a couple of kind of neat things in the text that we never have enough time. Never have
Yeah.
enough
So,
time.
did you tell me we have two additional points, right?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that I kind of thought through as I was thinking through a couple of extra things on on this text. So as we were talking about God's provision, as I said, we talked about how God provides to teach us, and then God provides because He loves us. A couple of other things just to kind of think through. One of the reasons that God also provides is because He wants to test us, and here's kind of what I mean by that. When God first gives manna to the people of Israel in the wilderness, God actually sets this up as a test. He says in Exodus 16, beginning at verse 4, I'm going to rain down bread from heaven for you. And the people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. And then I love this next line. He says, in this way, I'm going to test them. and see whether they will follow my instructions. Now, the question is, why is this a test? Because there's kind of an immediate temptation baked into the manna cake, so to speak. And the immediate temptation is to hoard, to take more than what you need for that day. Why? Because I think all of us struggle with this. We're always worried there's not going to be enough.
Well, and so that really goes to the idea of greed, doesn't it? That we have this inclination toward greed, to want to have and to want to accumulate and to want to hold more than we actually need. Interestingly enough, Zach, we were talking about this before we began. When it talks about the rabble that surrounded the Israelites, it said they had greedy thoughts, and that goes to the very temptation that God says the manna will be different than it's framed up, but still the same issue of greed.
And so I think one of the things that this calls on us to reflect, we live really in a culture of consumption where we're kind of like the rabble or we're kind of like the Israelites. We are tempted to always want a little bit more. And so the question for us is, um, can we, not the Israelites, but can we pass the test? Here's kind of the way that I like to think about this. And this is the question that I would pose to you if you're watching, just to kind of roll around in your head. What do you do when God provides enough? Okay, when you have enough to live, you have a roof over your head, clothes on your back, food on your plate. So God has provided enough, but he doesn't provide extra. How do you feel? Now, the biblical response, the appropriate response is, well, here's how you feel. You feel thankful. You say, thank you. For the Israelites, that's not their response. There are some, when the manna first falls, who try to go out and gather more, and the manna just winds up rotting. And then by the time you get to Numbers 11, the manna in and of itself isn't enough. They want extra meat. So we watch Disney at our house because of my kids. And so we were watching The Jungle Book not too long ago, right? And there's Baloo, and he sings a song to Mowgli. And what does he sing about? He sings about the bare necessities. And are you thankful when you have the bare necessities? Here's the blessing in just having the bare necessities. When you have enough, that actually leads you to something, which is simplicity, because you don't have a lot of extra. So you don't have a lot of extra to worry about. All you have is actually what you're using. And simplicity leads to serenity. And so there's this kind of extra bonus when you just have enough, which is you don't have to worry, like the guy with the barns, where to store your grain, because you don't have any place to store your grain. And so I'm not saying that if you have extra, you should feel guilty or bad or anything like that. That's blessing too. But if you don't, do you say thank you? Because that's part of the test.
We talked about yesterday the whole idea that as God is teaching the Israelites, that one of the ways to combat that discontent, that a greedy sense, is the idea of gratitude. We circled back to 1 Thessalonians 5, 16, 17, 18, where it talks about that we should rejoice, pray, and give thanks all the time. And it really kind of points out that there's an antidote to that negativity, to that sense that God isn't doing or God isn't giving what we want, that where we become discontent. There's another antidote for the issue of greed, and that's generosity. When we make a decision to be generous, when we decide to be intentional about giving to other people and meeting other people's needs and using what God has provided in our lives to love others, it has an incredibly powerful effect on the temptation to greed.
And this actually leads me to the second point that I wanted to make, which is God provides to sanctify us. Now, that's a fancy word. It simply means to make us holy. And so the question is, okay, so if God gives to us, how does that make us holy? Well, first and foremost, let's make sure I say this. It makes us holy because of the greatest gift that God has ever given, which is Jesus. He gives us his holiness. He forgives our sin. He covers us with his righteousness. But then that allows us to actually do some holy things. Well, what holy things are we called to do? Well, we're called to give just like God has given to us. The principle here is that God doesn't just want to provide to us, He wants to provide through us. The Israelites, they were very concerned. How much manna can I get? Can I get more than I can get in one day? Can I hoard it? And God says, no. Or how much quail can I get? Can I get something other than manna? I also want some meat. And God says, well, you can have it, but you're actually missing the point. What I'm giving to you is actually, it's meant to be a witness to the world. God doesn't just want to provide to the Israelites, he wants to provide through the Israelites. He wants the Israelites to actually be a light to what he's able to do. Now, there's this great little section that the Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 9. This is verses 10 and 11, and Paul spells this out in spades. Paul says this: Now, God, who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food, so just like he did to the Israelites, will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. Now, I want you to pick up on the little phrase, the harvest of your righteousness. It's not just that God provides stuff, right? He provides character. He provides what we might call the fruit of the Spirit, things like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness. He provides spiritual gifts as well as physical gifts too. And the spiritual gifts are actually gifts that help us in righteousness. And so Paul continues, this is verse 11, you will be enriched in every way. So in physical ways and in spiritual ways. But then Paul doesn't stop there. He continues, so that, in other words, God doesn't just provide to you so you can go, hey, look at all the stuff that I got. Okay. There's a so that God provides to you for a reason. So that, and then here's the key, you can be generous. Exactly what you were saying.
It also makes me think, Zach, when you're talking about how God works sanctification, how he makes us more holy, more and more ultimately, simplest way to think about it, he makes us more and more like Jesus or himself. Uh, but in Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9, that famous passage on grace, it says, for it is by grace we've been saved through faith. So it's talking about the fact that God gives to us, right? That's what grace is all about, giving us something we don't deserve. But Ephesians 8 and 9 flow immediately into Ephesians 10, where it talks about how we've been recreated in Christ Jesus. So in other words, we're recreated in the model of Christ Jesus to do what? Live a masterpiece life. And that masterpiece life always centers around generosity of heart, generosity of mind, generosity of words, generosity of resources.
And so what Paul does is he actually does kind of the same thing here in 2 Corinthians 9, because just like Paul says, I want you to be generous in Ephesians 2, Paul says in verse 11, you're going to be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And then Paul adds one more point. He says, and through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. In other words, people are going to see that you're generous and it's going to do something to them. They're going to start giving thanks to God. They're going to start praising God. They're going to start giving glory to God. And so Paul sets up the cycle of giving, where giving always starts with God. He's the first giver. Without him, we have nothing. God first gives to you, and you say, thank you. And then you follow Paul, so that, and you go, okay, God has given to me. He's been generous to me. Now I want to give to others. And others receive what we have given to them. And they go, wow. So what do? They give thanksgiving to God, and it goes right back to God. And so there's this cycle from God to us, from us to others, from others to God. And the more that cycle repeats itself, the more it begins to include more and more people, the more people come to faith, the more people give glory to God. And so this cycle of generosity, this cycle of provision from God is key not only for our basic survival, it's key for our witness as Christians. Here's kind of the bottom line. God doesn't just provide to make your life comfortable. He provides so that you can be made holy and so that you can be a blessing.
One of the things that's really a powerful temptation during this COVID-19 season is to look out and to say, there are all of these things that are risky, right? There are all of these things that are in difficult circumstance, all of these unanswered questions. And for all of that to sort of settle in our hearts and our minds and cause fear. and anxiety. And one of the fascinating things about fear and anxiety is that that works in direct contradiction to generosity. When we're feeling anxious or afraid or nervous, it tends to make us feel like we've got to kind of hold on to what we've got. We've got to kind of protect and look out for ourselves, as opposed to the living that God invites us to, where we trust Him, we have confidence in Him, we know that our days are numbered by Him and that He will provide what we need. And so we can be generous. Now, that doesn't mean foolish, that doesn't mean reckless, but it means that we can live generously, knowing that God is going to provide for us and we're going to have what we need, so that we can also not only have what we need, so that we can meet the needs of others that God puts in our path.
And so I guess the simple invitation back to the Israelites is, um, don't cut the cycle of generosity short. The Israelites, they're provided for by God, and what do? And it just stops. It stops with them. And that's a tragedy. And so don't let what God provides stop with you, because it's not a help. It's not a help to anybody, and it's not a help to you. And so that's Numbers 11.
Just a couple of extra points from yesterday's message, and I hope it was a blessing to you. We'll continue on with the book of Numbers for the next several weeks. It's our summer sermon series, and we'll continue then on Mondays to bring a few extra points along as well. Zach, what's coming up on Wednesday this week?
I believe you have a special guest, do you?
That's exactly right. We have Paul Teskey coming, and he is going to be teaching. And Paul's teachings are always intriguing and eminently practical. And so I hope you'll invite somebody to watch with you, or maybe invite somebody from somewhere else to tune in. You can always do this via Facebook Live, but you can also find these Bible studies on the Concordia streaming site, just as if someone were streaming the worship service from our site, exact same place. But we'd love to have folks join us and be blessed by Paul's teaching.
Yeah, and then because we usually do a psalm study on Wednesday, well, we're going to bump that to Friday, and so we'll have some fun and a psalm on Friday. So that's what this week is looking like. Hope you'll join us for Isolation Bible Study.
Yeah, and then one more thing coming up next week. We're actually going to go back to some of the favorite Isolation Bible studies. While you and I have a little break, we're going to go back and bring back. So I believe we're going to hear from Dr. Kloa again, the study that he did where he talked us through a portion of the Museum of the Bible, and some other of the teachings coming up. So it's going to be a great couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. So thanks for joining us today.
God bless you. Hope you have a great day and a great week.